Hello and welcome to today's webcast hosted by the Sales Management Association. Our session will start momentarily. First, a few announcements. Please note that we will not open attendees' audio lines during the Q&A portion of our session today, but we do very much welcome your questions and your comments. You can submit these at any time. Just type them into the small window on the right side of your screen labeled questions, and your remarks will come directly to me as moderator. I'll read them for you during the Q&A. Also, a reminder that today's webcast will be recorded. We'll make it available for playback in the Sales Management Association's resource library, where our members will also find copies of today's slides available for download there. Today's session is one in a series of web-based Sales Management Association presentations that feature practitioners and thought leaders in the field of Salesforce effectiveness. The Sales Management Association is a professional association for sales operations, sales enablement, and sales management professions. We provide our members with research, case studies, training, peer networking, and professional development. If you're joining us for the first time, we invite you to consider membership in the association, and would love for you to visit us online. We're at salesmanagement.org. While you're on our site, be sure to check out our recently launched course on territory management. It's the first in a series of professional development courses. This one's intended for people who have responsibility for optimizing sales territories in their firms. Yes, also stay tuned for additional course offerings from us in the first quarter of 2019. My name is Bob Kelly. I'm Sales Management Association Chairman. I'm happy today to introduce two great speakers. They are Paulette Green from MindSpring and Peter Ostro from Serious Decisions. I'll introduce them now. Paulette Green is Vice President of Professional Services for MindTickle, a leader in sales enablement whose sales readiness platform is used by global enterprises to boost business outcomes and achieve excellence. Paulette has more than 20 years experience in sales enablement, customer success, and SaaS deployment. She's joined by Peter Ostro, who is Senior Research Director at Serious Decisions, a global B2B research and advisory firm. Peter's focus areas are sales enablement, sales talent management, and operations. Before joining Serious Decisions, Peter was Vice President and Research Group Director for the Aberdeen Group and held senior leadership roles in business development and sales administration at Market One International and Monster Worldwide TMP Adcoms. So Paulette and Peter, thank you very much for being with us. It's great to have you. Welcome.
Thanks,
I think
Bob.
we're going to hear first from you, Peter. Is that right?
That is correct. So thank you very much.
You take it away.
You bet. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. How many of you have put together do-it-yourself furniture like the kind that you find at IKEA? If you remember when you did this the first time, you may have thought it was a great idea in the beginning, right? I'm going to save money. I don't have to schedule time to be home for the delivery. You know the drill. But in the end, you may have ended up with furniture you couldn't use, and at the same time probably tested the stability of your personal relationships. In all probability, it was an epic fail because you didn't have good instructions or the right tools. So this is similar to the frustration that a lot of organizations see when it comes to enabling professional salespeople in the B2B space with the knowledge they need to be successful as they interact with buyers. So there's a lot of issues that get in the way of doing a better job transferring knowledge to our sales forces. First, reps are the primary point of contact for buyers. That's how our buyers get most of their information about our company and offerings. Our buyers tell us that those interactions could in fact be a lot better, but we continue to see B2B organizations transfer knowledge to reps in very ad hoc ways, which either don't work for sellers or just can't be scaled or repeated. Plus, portfolio marketers, product, solutions, industry, services, marketing, et cetera, and sales enablement teams are not collaborating enough in developing programs that are informed by the needs of the reps we're trying to enable. So as a result, most sales leaders find that knowledge gaps among sales reps are a key reason for not achieving their quota. However, B2B buyers continue to report that the sales rep is actually the person from the winning provider organization who has the biggest impact on their decision making. So what is it that winning providers do differently to address sales knowledge gaps and increase the effectiveness of the buyer's interactions with their reps. Today, we're going to help you guys understand what winning providers do differently to transfer knowledge so that reps bring value to their interactions with your buyers. You'll gain some insight into how buyers perceive sales interactions and the confidence level of sales reps to execute those interactions. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about how marketing and sales interlock most effectively to create and deliver sales knowledge transfer programs that close the common sales knowledge gaps. So before we go deeply into those details, let's define sales knowledge transfer. For us at Serious Decisions, we think of sales knowledge transfer as the process of enabling reps with the knowledge they need about the markets, your buyers, your company's value, and your offerings and those of your competition to then be able to apply that knowledge during the buying process so that reps maximize every buyer interaction, which in turn accelerates deals and increases overall sales. What we want to do is to get that knowledge into their brains, but without resorting obviously to a full Vulcan mind meld, so that each time they're interacting with a buyer, your reps can apply that knowledge. Think about the fact that a sales rep has to be prepared with a multiplicity of combinations of all those different knowledge components across multiple interactions with their buyers, from the first sales call to the value meeting to the demo to the contract even being signed. It's daunting when you think about how much a rep supposedly has to retain in their brains on top of having the right skills to apply all of that knowledge. So at Serious Decisions, we conduct primary market research to answer these questions by speaking directly with B2B sales reps and managers, and the data that you're going to see today stems from our 2018 Serious Decisions Sales Talent Study. So first of all, what did the folks we talked to tell us about the need for effective knowledge transfer? First, many reps indicated to us that they want to spend more time on personal development. And this number is actually even larger for those millennials that we all struggle so hard to attract to sales roles. Secondly, high-performing sales managers recognize the value of understanding the company's offerings and the impact that this actually has on rep execution, with fully 85% of these high-performing managers telling us that it's extremely or very important to rep execution. However, only about a third of reps tell us that they get no formal training for product launch, and even more concerning, well over half indicate that they have no available training for buyer personas. So it's not a big mystery why sales teams struggle to connect buyer needs to the offerings that they sell in a differentiated way. So kind of our question for today is, could it be that the training maybe exists, but reps don't know where to find it, or it's not physically or intellectually accessible? What if they just don't like the training that you're providing? So let's talk a little bit about what not to do, and hopefully this doesn't represent too many of the things that you guys are seeing in your company. So if you remember the current approaches that we talked about in the beginning, the ones that aren't driving the right results, let's take a short look at some of the not to do's. Our first example of what not to do is thinking someone else will take care of the sales knowledge transfer programs for you. So if you're like me and you have kids, you're familiar with the not it approach, right? Where everybody touches their nose to avoid some sort of short-term and inane and unnecessary responsibility. We see grown adults doing this as well when it comes to sales knowledge transfer. And when you think it's not my job and someone else will do it, that kind of leads to an over-reliance on the first-line sales managers or your already strained sales enablement resources. So touching your nose or pushing the responsibility downstream, it doesn't make it go away. Next, have you ever gotten crab with a K in your sushi? You know that stuff. It's made to look like crab, but it's really pollock or bream, maybe some crab flavoring to make you think it's crab. Well, that's our second example. In sales knowledge transfer, this would be akin to taking buyer-facing content like a brochure or white paper and just handing it off cold to your salespeople instead of understanding that you have a different audience, different learning, and different content consumption personas. Or it could be doing a feature or benefit dump like a data sheet. Neither of these approaches work because you're actually telling the rep in so many words, this is something that's kind of like what you might need. I have nothing designed for you and your needs, so here's something that we created for something else. Good luck. Hope you figure it out, and would you like a California roll to go with that? Next, we have the covert approach, where the programs or the lack of programs really creates an environment where sales teams have very little choice but to fill the gap on their own, and they go rogue, and you know what they do. They create black market content. It's not necessarily their fault. They didn't have the right thing to begin with, so they try to solve the problem on their own. Sometimes it works, but mostly it doesn't. It's this lack of formal knowledge transfer that forces your reps to make it up, which leads to very mixed results. And then finally, what not to do is performing random acts where rep-facing materials are created, great, but then we just throw them over the wall or onto a SharePoint site, and we hope that folks catch whatever knowledge is buried in those materials. But you guys know this, when things get thrown over the wall, they lack context, and we lose the ability to measure rep engagement and any kind of impact that we can see. It also demonstrates, frankly, a lack of empathy and understanding of what a rep's world is like. Imagine what it's like to be a rep. You're struggling to connect all the dots and have meaningful conversations with your buyers. Every time, though, that you fail to do it by looking misinformed or incompetent in front of yet another buyer who likely tells you and your boss how disappointed they are that you've wasted their time. Kind of sucks. So, needless to say, we don't recommend any of these approaches. They're not scalable, they lack consistency, and the results are difficult to measure and to replicate. And nobody really likes that fake crab with a K. So, Bob, why don't we go ahead and execute our poll now? So Bob's going to click the magic buttons, and we're going to ask you guys this question. Which sales knowledge transfer sin, of the sins that we have down below here, is most common in your organization? So we don't really know who owns the responsibility for getting knowledge about our products and offerings to our reps, or, you know, it kind of happens, but it's pretty much ad hoc or on demand, or we just give our marketing content to the sellers. You know, it's made for buyers and they figure out how to translate it, or we actually do have a lot of training. It's in the LMS, or we've got a repeat set of words there. We're perfect. We commit no sin whatsoever. So no ownership. It's not proactive. We just use marketing content. It's self-serve in our corporate HR-owned learning management systems, or we're awesome and everything is awesome and we commit no sins. So Bob, let's see what kind of results we have from our guests today.
Okay, Peter, giving everyone just a few more seconds here and I'll close.
All right.
There we go.
Always interesting to see what comes up. Hopefully not too many people are saying we commit no sin, because you're here for a reason today. And there we go. So the number one reason is we kind of have sales knowledge transfer, but it's kind of when somebody asks for it or somebody thinks about doing it, followed by, oh boy, we give marketing content to the sellers. In other words, we don't create content for our sellers that's designed to work for them. We just give them content for somebody else and kind of hope they figure it out. Well, it's appropriately sad because that gives us lots to talk about today. So Paulette, from your perspective, what do these results look like? What do you see out there?
Yeah, so the most common issues that I see with customers is, first of all, the ad hoc enablement. So one of the things that we do is we really try to help our clients to align enablement with the strategic initiatives of the organization and really focus enablement on impacting, you know, the outcomes, the business outcomes for those initiatives. So that alignment piece is really important. And then the second area is just giving all the content to sellers. And the problem is that if you overload the sellers, they won't engage. And even if they do engage, they won't remember it. So it's really important to align enablement with the sales process and activities, and really to focus on the behaviors that drive success in the field.
Very true. That overload piece is exactly what we talk about when we get into one of the 4 pieces of our strategy that we'll talk about right now. So Bob, if you could just give me back rights, we will move on to our sales knowledge transfer approach and the 4 different modules that we talk about as best practice here at Serious Decisions. So there we go. So we see that based on the challenges that we've talked about, let's talk about what does work when it comes to sales knowledge transfer. So based on the data that we collect from buyers and sellers, actually, we know that there are 4 key attributes to successful knowledge transfer. First, it's done well if it's informed, and Paulette, literally, you just said this, if it's informed by the selling motion so that sales activities are aligned to buyer interactions. Next, it has to be aligned to the sales talent lifecycle, so you know when to deliver that knowledge based on a rep's tenure and seniority in your organization. Next, it has to be modular. Paulette talked about overload. It has to be consumable in small bite-sized chunks to make it easier for folks to retain. And finally, it has to be integrated with your overall learning strategy so that we go beyond telling reps what they need to know to showing them and having them take ownership of that knowledge over time. So these are the 4 major components that we'll talk about. And then I know we've got some questions coming in, so we'll address those, as Bob indicated, through the panel, the chat panel, and then we will get to those toward the end. So let's start with effective knowledge transfer and take a closer look at the data and get a deeper understanding of why each of these 4 attributes leads to more effective knowledge transfer. So the first is what we call informed by selling motion. And so you may be asking yourselves, what do those words mean? What is a selling motion? Well, to us at Serious Decision, a selling motion is what a seller does in response to how the buyer wants to buy from your organization. It's reverse engineered backwards from that interaction with your buyer. It's not designed on paper and thrown at the seller and buyer. A selling motion is what the seller does in response to how the buyer wants to buy. So in an audience-centric organization, and hopefully we all are, our sellers should be interacting with buyers based on those buyers' preferences. The selling motion informs the rep's activities, what they do, and the knowledge needs, which is knowing how to do it. So the goal for selling motions is to make sure that the required knowledge is aligned to the rep's activities, which are determined by the buyer's journey. We cannot control the buyer's journey, believe it or not. So we actually have to use that as the orientation point to determine what activities the rep needs to do, and then follows the knowledge that's required for each of those specific activities. That's how we ensure the right learning outcomes. So one of the things that we learned from the data that we found in our surveys is that the demand type drives our sales reps' knowledge needs. Now, our terminology here at Serious Decision says the demand type is the market situation that your company is marketing and selling into. The reason why these demand types are so important is because the buyers actually have a very different set of questions in each of them. So the first demand type is new concept. This is when you have to make a buyer persona conscious of an unrecognized need or problem. It's very evangelistic, and it aims to create a sense of urgency to acknowledge a need and take action on solving that need. If you have a very disruptive product or service, often if there's no budgetary line item, it requires an issue creation, something like 3D printers, or at one point in time Google Glasses. So that's new concept. The next kind is new paradigm. This is where you have to make a buyer persona consider an alternative or complementary approach. You need to motivate some change and mitigate risk. You need to be very provocative and tends to focus on how your offering provides, not a new concept, but just a better alternative for a previously solved need. You're going to be talking to folks about retooling their existing processes, solving the current problem that they've already identified better, or replacing a current line item, like moving from on-prem to SaaS software. And then finally, we have established market. This is when you actually need to make a buyer persona realize that your offering is simply a better choice than that of your competitor. So it's the most competitive approach. It focuses primarily on positioning and differentiation. This is a necessary product or service. It's a highly contested market, and frankly, you're trying to steal market share. So an example is a Salesforce automation platform going up against another, or servers, or something very commoditized like high-end copiers and printers, which we still use now and then. So our data from the sales talent study last year tells us that the vast majority of reps are engaging with buyers in the new paradigm and established market demand types. So we're really just going to focus on those two for today. So when we talk about making sure that you're aligning the knowledge transfer with the selling motion, one of the things that we did in our research was to understand that reps told us that they actually preferred the same top 3 job aids in both of those demand types, both the established market as well as the new paradigm. But what's different is that they're used in very different order. So let's take a look at the difference between new paradigm and established market across the buying decision process through the buyer's journey, from early education to middle solution to the final vendor selection phase. So for specific competitive product comparisons, reps in established markets need those comparisons earlier than they need them for the new paradigm. This makes sense, actually, because there's a lot, those are different market situations where one is highly contested from the beginning with a lot of competition, your established market, but the other, new paradigm, takes a lot more convincing up front with the competition coming up later in the process. So the next kind of job aid that was very popular for all reps was your product service guides and reference materials. Here, sales reps in established markets need these the same time that they need the competitive comparisons in the middle of the process when they're presenting solutions to the buyer needs. However, we see a switch with new paradigm. Look at how the blue dot moves to earlier in the buyer's journey. These guides are needed earlier in the education phase to convince buyers that you have a better approach. They have to have the offering knowledge up front to present a compelling argument for the buyer to make a change. Finally, when it comes to sales success stories, we see different rep needs again. In established market, reps need sales success stories from the beginning. Again, this is all part of the environment where vendors are competing to steal market share from one another, and those success stories help to properly position and differentiate your organization from the start. In new paradigm, though, we don't see these success stories needed by reps until far into the buying process, when the buyer is more like, we need to justify our vendor selection, and they need proof points from you to make the business case from buying from you. But wait, guys, that's actually not all. The data gets even more interesting as we dig a little deeper and look at what the reps tell us are their top 10 favorite job aids. So when we look at new paradigm versus established market, the top 3 that we just saw are actually the same, although in slightly different orders. But take a look at the next 7 within the, the top 10. Numbers 4 through 10 are completely different from new paradigm to established market. So the sum of all of this information, I know there's a lot on the screen, is this. What are we learning here? It's because all the different demand types drive what a rep needs to know. And therefore, we can confirm that the sales knowledge transfer is far from a one-size-fits-all proposition. That means you can't ignore, in this example, demand type and develop just one program and call it done. Hey, everybody, here's what you need to sell to your buyer at all stages of the journey, or even at different stages of the journey. In fact, what we're realizing is you can't ignore the demand type. One size does not fit all. The interactions, the messaging, the conversation that your reps have with their buyers are different for each demand type. And again, that's just one variable that we've thrown at you today is this demand type. But that's why reps have such different needs when it comes to the job aids and the content, not the marketing content thrown at them, but custom design content for your reps that allows you to develop sales knowledge transfer programs that account for the different rep knowledge needs being driven, in this case, by each of the demand types. Okay, so the second piece of our knowledge transfer approach here is how we align knowledge transfer to where the rep is in their sales talent lifecycle. Are they a new hire looking for foundational concepts, or maybe are they a tenured rep striving to keep up with complex selling motions and all the different changes in the selling environment? You don't take everybody in the modern area and throw them into a one-room schoolhouse. You have different educational approaches for each of your different folks depending on where they are. So if we want to ask how tenure actually affects the knowledge requirements and how you deliver, but not over-deliver depending on the hiring profile, you have to think about who they are, their onboarding requirements, and the ongoing delivery. So to fully understand these needs, we took a deep dive into the biggest challenges that reps tell us they have that get in the way of them being successful. So we asked, what's hindering you from meeting your assigned quota? So while we asked about a whole big laundry list of items, everything from quality of leads to administrative burden, we extracted just the items that are directly related to knowledge transfer. We then segmented those out based on newbies and not so newbies, or more scientifically, those folks who are under 1 year in tenure and those who are over 1 year in their role. So what we found is that both groups overwhelmingly said they were challenged with differentiating offerings. Hey, Bob, could you reassign the privileges to me? For some reason, my clicker is not moving forward.
Sure, Peter. Just click in the body of the slide. It'll reestablish for you.
There we go. Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So what we found here was both groups overwhelmingly said that they were challenged with differentiating their offerings. They struggled to articulate and prove what makes the offering demonstrably different and better and why the customer should care. However, our newbies told us that they're afraid to ask the questions in customer interactions because they may not really fully understand the answer. They don't yet have the confidence in their ability to have deeper discussions on why the buyer needs to change their status quo. They can't confidently address the buyer resistance to change and address it at the root. So essentially, they don't fully grasp the world of the buyer and their challenges. Tenured reps, though, they have a much better understanding of their buyer, but they struggle to confidently connect solutions to buyer challenges and keep up with the product changes or understand the benefits from the perspective of the buyer. So here's the conclusion for this piece. Reps are motivated to seek out the knowledge that they need and learn when they can directly relate that knowledge to the challenges they're having on a daily basis in their specific customer actions. For sales enablement, this means that you need to take the time to identify the challenges that your folks have across the different rep talent lifecycle and then stratify the knowledge accordingly. This is basically where you think of your low, medium, and high performers, and you ask those folks, what do you do and what do you prefer to do? Sort of like the way we deal with some of our sales activity studies and time management. It's the same thing as saying to both newbies and experienced folks, what gets in your way? And then you can start to understand from the high, medium, and low performers what's working for the right folks and what you should be avoiding with not the right folks.
Peter, just to add to this, this is an area where I actually see a lot of progress, with clients using MindTickle to develop a really holistic view of individual and team competency levels. And what we see is that in their enablement programs, they're including, a lot more knowledge checks, just, a couple of questions sprinkled in throughout to help the sellers understand where their gaps are, as well as the managers and program managers, including video role plays, and they capture reviewer feedback and ratings data, coaching sessions where they capture manager feedback and ratings data, and then combine this with field performance data. So the end result is that you can really identify strengths, gaps, enablement needs, using a very holistic data-driven approach to understand, where those strengths, gaps, and needs are.
Very much spot on, Paulette. I mean, we're seeing more and more organizations look at enablement through the lens of best practices in learning and development best practices, and not just throwing and showing, if you get my drift. Yep. So we see that quite a bit as well. So that is why it's actually a great segue. We need to take a modular approach to knowledge transfer and to deliver it in small chunks that are easily consumed by reps. And we're not implying that reps don't, that they're not good learners. All of us are more bite-sized, chunky, BuzzFeed headline USA Today oriented than we used to be. It's just kind of the nature, I think, of the 21st century business brain. So our goal in making knowledge transfer modular then is to produce building blocks or smaller bits of learning in multiple formats that are accessible at any point in time during each of your reps' active deals. So with a modular approach, we're more likely to get reps engaged and have them retain the knowledge and re-educate themselves, hopefully on their own, at any point in the buying process. So let's go back to the brain science that we referenced a little bit earlier. Here are the 3 challenges that we're up against when it comes to the human brain and how sales reps tend to learn. First, after 10 minutes of learning activity, cognitive backlog kicks in. That means that the sales rep's brain, or your audience's brain, tunes out after about 10 minutes, hopefully not in today's webinar. Your brain doesn't process information quickly enough to be able to absorb what's being said after 10 minutes. I hope you guys are still with me, but I'm going to deliberately pause now and have a drink of water and thus reset your attention span for 10 more minutes. Or Diet Pepsi in my case. All right, so next, there's a commonly held belief that the 70-20-10 ratio represents how people tend to learn. It holds that 70% of what a sales rep learns is on the job in real sales situations as they happen, and our research bears this out. So most of what your sellers learn, that actually happens in real-time observation. Next, 20%, the common thinking goes, of what a rep learns happens in peer learning, where a less tenured rep is connected to somebody more seasoned. It's either active coaching, playback, role play, or even just passively observing during interactions with real buyers. The experienced rep tends to coach and mentor newer reps based on their own personal experiences and work for them, so you need to be careful who you pick as your mentors. This can be executed formally through assigned buddy programs, but we all know that the informal routes are there for sharing tribal knowledge, that they're super strong when it's just as easy to ask the person who's sitting next to you a question, even though they may or may not be the right person to be asking that question. And then the thinking goes, only 10% of what a rep learns happens in a formal learning environment. Those that are more structured with a curriculum and the goals and objectives clarified for that learning experience. This is probably a more frustrating reality because B2B organizations tend to put most of their resources here into the formal training than they do in the on-the-job and peer training. So that's probably surprising, annoying, and maybe a little bit embarrassing for some of our guests today, but that's the reality, folks. So sorry and not sorry, right? That's the reality. So our last number is 87%. That represents what's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. It's the amount of traditional learning that's forgotten in the first 30 days. Way back in 1885, a gentleman named Hermann Ebbinghaus supposedly proved this, and over the last 120 years, it's been proven over and over again by various studies. If we don't use something every day, if it's not reinforced in a systematic way, and we don't have a Sheldon Cooper eidetic memory, we're going to forget it. So guys, this is the data that drives the need for a modular or building block approach to knowledge transfer. But it doesn't mean that everything has to be 10 minutes or less, simply that within each 10-minute learning segment, you need to shake things up a little bit. Do something different to reset the brain. Do a demo, show a video, do a stretch, back rub, tell a story, anything to bring your sales audience back from their daydream. It also doesn't mean that we abandon the learning departments and technologies and formalities that we've invested heavily in just because 10% of what reps learn comes from that formal approach. What it does mean is we have to strike a different balance amongst the 3 types of learning and perhaps redirect some of the resources towards establishing better on-the-job learning, mentoring, and observational types of approaches. So let's see how brain science plays out with the sales reps based on the data from our sales talent study. We do see some patterns emerging based on the sales reps generation. So while baby boomers, I'm part of that, we tend to prefer more traditional learning delivery, things like on-the-job training, classroom learning, observation, and peer collaboration. What we see emerging from Gen X and my kids, the millennials, is more just-in-time learning and delivery. In fact, they're twice as likely, these age cohorts, to value just-in-time versus just-in-case. What these folks want is more targeted e-learning. If they're about to walk into a conversation with the buyer, they're going to prefer a short video showing how someone just like them has had that same conversation, or top 3 things I need to know for this conversation. Another interesting thing that we found is over the last 3 years is that podcast and gamification have in fact continued to fall to the bottom of the preferred ways of learning and are not by any chance the highest. In fact, they're amongst the lowest rated delivery channels. Logically, you'd think because reps are on the roll, listening would be a lot better, but in reality, they just tend to not learn well by listening. The neurolinguistic programming, audio, kinesthetic, visual stuff tends to bear that out. Sales reps tend to be more visual learners. They need to see something to get their minds around it. And while on the gamification piece, game mechanics can definitely improve engagement, it can drive short-term behavior. When it comes to early, fresh content, tends to not be a way to improve their learning at the beginning of those learning processes. Reps generally want to be on top for revenue attainment, of course, but being the top learner in the sales org is not necessarily one of their priorities. So find the right places to use contests and game mechanics to motivate short-term behavior and reinforce learning that was done earlier. So when taking a modular approach to your sales knowledge transfer programs, the last of our 4 major pieces, remember that information dumps do not work. Let's say that again, guys. Information dumps do not work. You have to chunk up the knowledge into micro learning that's attached to the needs of your reps. Try to focus more on your visual and kinesthetic, the way you feel, learning, and less on auditory or sound-oriented learning. Reps want visual learning where they can see what good looks like, and kinesthetic learning where they can practice a sales activity and get feedback on how to improve it. All right, so our final piece of the learning strategy is to talk about, and I think I need to re-engage one more time. Here I am, Bob, I'm good to go. So far we've talked about the attributes of a highly effective knowledge transfer process, how the knowledge needs to be aligned to the selling motion to give it context, and about the need to provide different knowledge to different individuals based on their tenure in their role, and to deliver that knowledge in a way that's chunked, bite-sized, and can be combined and deconstructed as needed. So finally, the last attribute we're going to cover involves integrating knowledge transfer with your larger learning strategy. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned the forgetting curve. I hope you guys remember the forgetting curve. So I'm going to reinforce that knowledge for you. It's the research that's been done frequently on our brain's ability to retain information. 87 to 93% of what we're going to learn is forgotten within 30 days, unless it's something we use regularly or is reinforced in very specific ways. So what does that tell us? Don't waste your effort to just tell salespeople things, a piece of information, without tying it to how they're going to use it in real life. And also find a way for them to recall and use that information immediately when their needs promote that need, i.e. the deals that they're working. This is the cadence that's telling them what they need to know, showing them what good looks like, allowing them to practice in a controlled environment, and in getting continued reinforcement over time. The hardest areas for most companies to execute are practice and ongoing reinforcement. So what does our data tell us? Our study told us something kind of pretty interesting. Over a third of high-performing reps told us that they needed and wanted more coaching from their managers. And these are the folks that managers are most likely not to coach, right? Because assuming their competence and confidence roles levels are pretty high. So while I doubt any rep wakes up so excited because today's the day they get to role play, what we do see is that they value this experience much more than their lower performing peers. Additionally, the best reps out there, those who have beaten their number the last 2 years, don't want to simply be told what to say or what to tell. Don't show up and throw up at me. They're way more likely than underperformers to indicate that role play, which is a far more, and as we said earlier, kinesthetic way, an interactive way of practicing, coaching, and learning, that's the way to get through to them. And a key point here, the way for them to better assimilate and remember, the key word, what they've learned. It's sort of like what we were all encouraged to do back in school, right? When you took notes. When you wrote something down, you were more likely to retain it. So when you have to stand up and record a B2B price negotiation tactic, for instance, you're more likely to remember that over the long term. So in fact, when we look at the low performers in our study, those are the folks who were 80% or less against their number in both of the last 2 years. They were 8 times more likely to not even have role plays at all in part of their training. And a quarter of the low performing managers, the worst managers, said they had no idea how to coach their new hires and reinforce the learning that they may have received in onboarding. So we talked about epic fails early on. I hope none of your organizations looks quite this bad. So to sum up, the takeaway for this final piece of our brain pie here is that it's not enough to just transfer the knowledge to your sellers just by telling. The reinforcement goes way beyond testing and even role play and requires that we enable managers and coaches to be able to coach and reinforce the application of the knowledge over time. So that's basically the takeaway for this final piece.
Peter, just to add to that, so, we help our clients to plan their enablement using a teach, show, practice, reinforce framework, right? So teach is obviously, teaching, showing is modeling excellence, practice is providing the opportunity to practice before you're working with customers through things like video role play, and then, reinforce is how do you really drive sustainable behavior change and overcome that forgetting curve? So coaching is absolutely a key part of the reinforcement, but I think that it's a huge challenge for organizations. It's not enough to just say, hey, we want everyone coaching. You really need an enablement program targeted at your coaches, right? So when I talk to our clients about enablement, you really need 3 tracks. One is for your new hires, the second one is ongoing development, and the third one is for your development of your frontline managers. And a part of that is you also need to support your managers with a coaching platform that, number one, engages them in coaching, right? Because they're really busy and it's probably not their favorite thing and they may not feel very skilled. So engaging them in delivering ongoing coaching, but also helping them to understand, who to coach, what to coach, and how to coach. So having a data-driven platform that can help surface those strengths, gaps, and needs of individuals and their teams is really an important part of enabling your frontline managers.
Yeah, your cadence, Paulette, teach, show, practice, reinforce, very close to ours, which is tell, show, do, reinforce, and own. Slightly different variations on the same theme. That theme being that we've got a lot of great insight here into what low and high performers amongst sellers and managers tell us works for them. Are we putting into practice and making it a best practice in our organizations, understanding that when it comes to transferring knowledge successfully to our sellers, it's a lot more than the show and throw. We have to understand what the best practices are in general, and then specifically for each of the personas that we're going to be dealing with, how they learn most effectively. And guess what? That's exactly the same thing we do externally with our buyers. We identify their persona. We figure out what is the journey that we want them to take. We give them very specifically designed collateral and assets to bring them through that journey. So the big question, the rhetorical one, is why don't we do the exact same thing with our internal customers, the salespeople who we all are responsible for enabling? So with all of that great insight, how do we pull it all together? Here we have something which is one of our famous Serious Decisions models called the Sales Knowledge Transfer Framework, where you can take all of your learnings from today's webinar and apply it to your organization. So for you guys who are Serious Decisions customers, you probably have access to this. If you're not, this knowledge transfer framework was designed primarily for folks in a portfolio marketing type of role. What it says is you have to go through the sequence and the cadence of understanding your audience, determining the knowledge that you want them to have. You then plan your programs and then make sure you launch them effectively. And then all of the different roles that you see down below here, channel marketing, product management, my own sales enablement peeps, and communications are involved in different components of that portfolio marketing owned piece. So sales enablement itself may report up to the chief marketing officer, the chief sales officer, the CEO, but portfolio marketing tends to be the function that's going to create a lot of those initiative and the initial and ad hoc types of sales knowledge transfer pieces that we talked about. So what this allows us to do is to understand who is our audience and their knowledge needs. How do we build out the knowledge components on our markets, our buyers, our value as a company, our offerings, and our competitors, then putting the right sales enablement plan in place to define the knowledge programs based on rep needs and the existing knowledge gaps in the sales force, developing those programs by role, every single role needs its own, and then driving adoption of that knowledge over time. So what we went through today then allows us to kind of put this sales knowledge transfer framework into the context of what we talked about. First, your audience, that's all about making sure that your sales knowledge transfer efforts are informed by the selling motion that helps you get closer to the needs of your rep. It has to include a modular approach to help you chunk up the knowledge components into something that your rep audience members can easily consume. It needs to align to the sales talent lifecycle and integrate with your learning strategy. This is how you plan and design programs that take into account your audience personas, right? Your rep's tenure, and helps them apply the knowledge that they have learned. So when all of these programs are delivered with all of these attributes, the result tends to be a more effective knowledge transfer that sticks with the reps, changes their behavior, and of course improves the overall number. So in conclusion, for you guys who are in that sales knowledge transfer mode, if you're in portfolio marketing, we encourage you to think about your sales reps as you do your buyers and target them with specific programs for their needs while working sales enablement early and often. For sales enablement, you need to take the time to fully understand the knowledge required to execute at the role level, each of your rep personas, and make sure that the learning continuums go beyond just telling them what they need to know, but showing them how to apply it, allowing them to practice until they're great, and then ensuring with field activities and monitoring that their competencies are reinforced over time. So do you remember at the beginning of the presentation, that guy risking his sanity and his probably relationship to assemble IKEA furniture? The reason he couldn't make it look like the bookshelf in the store is because he probably didn't have a clear view to an effective process or framework. Maybe he even lacked insight or even the tools to make it all come together. If you guys follow the guidance that we've given you today, hopefully you can avoid that epic fail and make your knowledge transfer, if not your bookshelf, an epic win. So that's the Serious Decisions content for today. Paulette, I know you had a couple of case studies that you wanted to share with our guests.
Yes, all right. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we thought it would be helpful to share a few case studies of clients who applied many of the best practices that we just discussed. And the first one is a pharma client who needed to improve their product launch enablement. Their initial approach was a week-long instructor-led program that did include role plays, but there were a number of challenges related to cost, retention, and so forth. So they redesigned the program, and they designed it to spread out enablement as well as to include reinforcement in order to drive sustainable behavior change. So what they did was they included pre-work that was delivered via MindTickle that included knowledge checks. They still included instructor-led, but reduced that to 2 days to cut down on the information overload. They introduced a lot of post-instructor-led practice with video role plays, as well as post-instructor-led ongoing coaching that was based on defined competencies and behaviors. And the results were certainly impressive. The second example is a technology company. Their initial approach to enablement included a mix of instructor-led training, e-learning via an LMS, and monthly webinars. And the problem is that it wasn't delivering the results that they needed. There were challenges with long ramp times for new hires, low engagement levels, and they really had no visibility about retention and proficiency levels. So they reworked their program, and they designed it to provide more practice via video role plays. Ongoing assessments were included throughout to provide insights about knowledge, strengths, and gaps, and that's for the rep as well as the managers and the program managers. They included product updates, but they delivered these via MindTickle, which enabled them to provide it on an as-needed cadence. They had much higher engagement using microlearning. They included knowledge checks, so they got good data on proficiency levels and gaps, which was really important in them, sort of informing how they go forward. And again, very impressive results: reduction in ramp time, improved engagement and employee satisfaction, as well as win rates. So, with some, small changes to what you're doing, and by incorporating more of a teach, show, practice, reinforce approach to enablement, you really can have a major impact on the outcomes of your enablement programs. So that was it for the case studies.
Very good. I think we are able to take some questions. Does that sound like a plan?
Let's do it.
Sounds
excellent. Then I will advance to the question slide, which I prepared exactly for this moment in time. So let's do that. I'll take a moment before we do questions and remind our audience, you can submit your questions now. Just type them into that small window labeled questions, and I'll read them on your behalf for Peter and Paulette. So we do have a couple in the queue already. Let's get to those. The first is, how much of the knowledge transfer practices that you discussed apply to onboarding new sellers? Peter, can we have you address that one? I'll invite your comment following Peter's remarks. Paulette.
Sure. I think that looking at onboarding through the lens of this knowledge transfer piece, a lot of it does relate. If we think about the four major pieces, not so much the selling motion, because that's, the lesson there is to try to deliver just in time and not just in case learning. And onboarding obviously tends to be mostly about your just in case. But when we look at the other three pieces, aligning the knowledge transfer to the sales talent lifecycle, definitely, because we look at newbies versus more tenured folks. In terms of modular, yes, I think that attention spans are probably a little bit longer during onboarding when we're all eager to learn and be a good soldier, but still over time, probably just as short. And then in terms of integrating with a learning strategy, definitely. I mean, onboarding is the best place to start folks off with the right habits. If you want them to use certain processes, certain tools, and if you have an organization where there's an emphasis on learning and the culture, onboarding is the best way to actually get folks just in the habit. If it's user-friendly, of course, and visually compelling, as we discussed earlier, into the habit of paying attention to the learning and understanding that it's going to be the system of record for them that'll be closely associated with their deal-making activities moving forward. Paulette, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all applies. I think, like you said, in onboarding, people definitely come to it willing to invest more time in their enablement, but you still need to respect, how people learn and what you need to do to engage them. So I think a micro learning approach still works. You need to apply that also even with an onboarding. So, don't have a new hire come in and just sit down and watch a 3-hour video. Break it up. You have, a 5-minute video, a couple of questions. Maybe there's then you're going to have, let's say, a PowerPoint with audio that they're watching, and a couple of questions. Maybe they're going to do some role play. So I think that micro-learning, introducing and changing up the modes of enablement are really important. There are so many different tools in your tool bag now as an enablement practitioner that you have every opportunity to deliver information in a variety of ways, including ongoing assessments and knowledge checks, role plays and so forth. I think peer mentoring is an important part of an onboarding program, but with best practices is, not necessarily introducing the peer mentor, on day one. Wait until that new hire has enough information under their belt that they can actually ask really good questions of the peer mentor. So it's a rewarding experience for both the mentor and the new hire is going to get much more out of that mentoring. Making it role specific, really target what you're enabling them on to their specific role, what type of selling they're doing, and so forth. So it's a big question with so much to say about onboarding. But again, everything that we've gone through here absolutely applies to onboarding.
That's great. Thank you, Paulette. Say, if it's okay, I'll stick with you for the next question. It is, in fact, about video micro-learning, and the questioner says the following: we are currently delivering micro-learning through weekly distribution of 2 to 3 minute videos. The viewership is good, but we're not getting much feedback on how the videos are impacting skills. Do you have any ideas on measurement of the effectiveness of these micro-learning videos?
Yeah, so that's great that you're keeping them short, and that's definitely the length of video that we would recommend. I'm not sure what platform you're using to deliver those, but what we see our clients doing is they'll deliver, let's say a weekly quick update, and they'll have a short video followed by a couple of questions. So right there, you're going to get some data on, what they've learned from that video. But then what we do is there's, you can track skills, beyond that, right? So you can see if they engaged, you can see if they immediately learned it, but then through let's say role plays or field-based coaching, if you have platforms where you're tracking how they're doing in a practice environment and in the field, that gives you more data that you can then understand if it's moving the needle. And then ultimately what you want to try and do is, look at that in relation to their actual field performance, right? So if you have data around their, how they've done with their kind of self-study questions, how they've done in role play, how they've done in field-based coaching ratings, as well as now you've got field performance data, you really get a very holistic picture, of what they're capable of, what their proficiency levels are, what they know and what they don't know. Now, I'm not saying you're going to do that for every single topic that you're focused on, but if you focus on the strategic initiatives of your organization and understand, that's what's going to make your company a success, right? Your business goals, strategic initiatives. If you understand what behaviors and capabilities are needed to drive success of those initiatives, that's what you want to focus on measuring.
Good, thank you. Okay, I'm saving the really tough questions for Peter, so I've got one of those now. I'm going to paraphrase this question. I actually pasted it in the chat so you can read it as I do so if you want. But the questioner is looking for advice on a change management topic, and they say that in their firm there are some bad habits. They want advice on how do you get everyone, to use a new practice consistently and implement good habits where currently bad habits exist. They cite an example of some CRM and document sort of administrative processes that they're especially keen to change. What is your advice on this change management related issue?
Sure. Change management is a really interesting topic. The first thing is to make sure that the change is appropriate and relevant. When we talk about, air quotes, good habits and air quotes, bad habits, well, in the eyes of whom? For example, there's plenty of organizations that get really upset because our salespeople are not using all of the right materials to sell. But we'll ask them, but did the team hit its number yet last year? Oh, yeah. Did 80 or 90% of the reps hit their number last year? Oh, yeah. So it may be a bad process, but it's got a good outcome. So first, it's to make sure that the change that someone is trying to execute on actually has value to the people who are our customers. Internally, that's our sales organization. If we can confirm that change management actually is the right thing to do, or we have no choice about it because it's being mandated from up on high, then change management has a lot of different steps. A lot of it just boils down to showing folks, unless you want to just command and control them, that the change has value. Prove that making some sort of a change from A to B, that A is detrimental to the organization or to people as an individual, and that B, the alternative, will actually make their life better. You can, of course, just mandate it. You can use the sticks, but we all know that the carrots work better. But, the example there, Bob, was CRM. For example, I know the question didn't exactly put it this way, but a lot of folks get upset, from a sales ops perspective because we spent all this money on the CRM or the sales asset management or the coaching tool or whatever, and people aren't using it. And so we need your help, Serious Decisions, and how do we get people to use it more? And we try to just put a hand up and say, stop. Is the goal to have a lot of people use your tool because you spent a lot of money on your tool? Or is the goal actually something else and the tool is merely a means to an end? No one ever got promoted from regional VP of sales to chief revenue officer because they drove CRM adoption. It in itself is a means, but it's not the end. So it's important to think about, what the necessary requirements for management are. Sure, we need our folks to put in enough data so that we can make proper management decisions, but getting them to put the information in should be part of the work stream that benefits them as well. And that's where you see the learning and the coaching and the practice and those other experiences best integrated with the deal management on a day-to-day level and the daily workflow of reps. If I actually need to learn something in order to have a great conversation with my buyer, then it should be pushed to me through my experience in the CRM managing my opportunity. That's the ideal way to do it, as opposed to someone saying, hey, Peter, we're going to be launching this new product. So I want you to take time away from your deals and sit through 8 hours of us talking at you tomorrow. And then someday in the future, you may or may not need that information. So it's really just boils down to what's in it for your audience.
And just to add to that, what I see is there's sort of three different areas to look at. Is why aren't they using it? It's going to be number one, they don't have the knowledge or skill, so then it's an enablement problem, right? Number two, it could be a buy-in issue, and that buy-in could be from the reps, but it could also be buy-in from the frontline managers. Specifically with CRM and sales process issues, what I have seen is where where there is no engagement or adoption, it's often because there's no enforcement for something like that from management, frontline management, and senior leaders, right? So enablement's never going to fix that problem. And then the third area is, maybe the process just isn't working right. So what really needs to happen is, it's you've got buy-in, knowledge and skill, but the real issue is that maybe the process itself is broken, or the CRM, it wasn't deployed properly. So to me, those are sort of the three buckets that you have to address. And again, some of the knowledge skill is obviously an enablement challenge. Buy-in is more of a leadership challenge. And if there's process issues, then it's more of a sales ops issue to kind of, work out what improvements are needed for that CRM or process or whatever the topic is.
Yeah, those are very astute answers. Thank you. That was indeed a tough question. So thank you for your insights there. I'm sad to say we're out of time. I'll cut off questions at this point, though. If you do have a question we didn't get to, I'll do our best to get our presenters to kindly respond by email. And I just want to thank you both for being here today. This is a really great and interesting presentation. Paulette Green from MindTickle and Peter Ostro from Serious Decisions. Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Very much.
And before we say bye, I'll remind our audience that our next Sales Management Association webcast is tomorrow, February 27th. We'll host a session tomorrow called The Devil's in the Data, Improving Sales Compensation Data Quality. You can learn about this session and many other sessions on our website at salesmanagement.org. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Thanks for your time and attention today. Goodbye until next time.